So what I want to do is just walk through the customer, the digital gateway customer journey. What I will say just before we start is the contract has only just recently been amended to take the gateway functionality into the main contract. So, while it is got a good level of understanding, there's going to be more understanding to come out as we go through the build. So as some of you will know, but I'll tell you again, is that the way these builds are being done is on an agile basis. So you have a very high level or a fairly high level description at the beginning called an epic. And then as you build each of those epics, you get a better understanding of the detail of the requirements. So these sort of journeys are based on what we know at the moment, but more information will come through. So where we start with the gateway is we thought that we'd start for the journey a bit further back from the gateway and how the information is created that will go there. So first and process, it starts actually at pre-bind and up to the point of bind. And because what the gateway is expecting eventually is a copy of a core data record on an API submission. And what the stages to the left of the gateway are describing is how that sort of API submission can be created. So we think one of the most common ways that's going to be created is that the broker will create an intelligent market reform contract, so an IMRC. Now, you should be aware that that's going through consultation at the moment, but the intention is that IMRC is a much better structured document based on the MRC at the moment, obviously, but it's much better from a structure point of view. It deals with how sections are managed, and it also is much easier to be machine readable. So the extraction process of the data from that IMRC is much better and higher quality than it would be from the MRC that's in existence today. And it contains the information to base the core data record on. It doesn't include all the information from the core data record, but I'll explain where that comes from in a moment. So what you start with is IMRC, and then it goes into discussion. Now, I think currently, these MRCs, which you'll know, are backloaded onto the system once placement's already happened. What we're hoping as we go into the future that these can be created earlier in the process, so we can start getting early views of what this core data record is looking like. But what we end up with as a process is once the broker's created that IMRC, there's a period of negotiation around risk placement, around firm order and bind, where it's created, the underwriter is reviewing it, there might be some discussion and amendment, the IMRC is amended to allow for those discussions, and at some point you get to a point where you actually agree what that contract is, and you'll be putting initially written lines down followed by signed lines from a broker and doing any market information they need. But all of that is changing the data about the risk, and therefore what's going on in that negotiation has to be reflected in that IMRC. And once that is done, if we look at the bottom green line, you would have a CDR or a core data record going along into the gateway via an API. So what you've got is you'd place, and then the placement platform would then send the API into the gateway. And I'll explain what happens in the gateway in a moment. But there's a couple of other ways that API can get into that gateway. So the gateway will only accept, at the moment, the design is that the only thing the gateway can receive is an API CDR. But there's 4 ways that API CDR can be created. One is by the placement platform, which is the one we've just walked around. You have an IMRC that's hopefully negotiated a bit earlier in the process. And when that's final, it can be sent through to the gateway. Worth mentioning that at this stage that there's also a concept for the placement platform for soft validation, where while you're creating that CDR, you can push it through to the gateway to be validated to see how complete and how accurate it is. But so that wouldn't be a submission as such. That would be a validation of where you are in the process and how much is green lighted from a content and completeness point of view. The other ways that this API can reach the gateway, obviously a carrier can submit an API directly. So if you've got all the information in the placement that's required for a CDR, and you've got the API technology, you will of course be able to submit that directly to the gateway. The other way is, which we think will be maybe common to begin with, is that you could actually extract the information from the IMRC itself and then extract that into an API and send it to the gateway. So there's an extraction option. So that's the third option. The fourth way is something that's just being discussed at the moment, is actually embedding some XML type code into the IMRC itself. And what that would mean is you're not extracting from the IMRC, you're just bringing it straight out on an XML basis to be able to send it through. So it's not a sort of extraction process. It's more of it's creating the data set based on the XML schema. So I know I've covered a lot of ground there, but just bear in mind that this one, the way it's shown here, the bottom line is showing you the creation of a CDR API from that placing platform, PPL, Whitespace, etc. The top one is that the broker or carrier could use a transitional extraction service. So that's the extraction service that you can use to create the API, or you can have a direct submission from broker and carrier, which is not shown here, but which is also possible. But what all of those four methodologies mean is you end up with a CDR API entering the gateway. Now, what does the gateway do with that CDR? Well, what the gateway is doing at this point is it's doing three main checks. So the first check is it's checking that the API is valid. So if you think about that's almost like a digital validation. It's not looking at the business rules or anything else at this time. It's just making sure the API is valid. And that would be just a pure reject. So if it's come in from one of those four methods of submitting an API, it will check that it's correct from a digital API content point of view. And if not, it would just reject. It would just say this is not how we'd expect in the format. Assuming it passes that one, it should do, because the API should follow the sort of contract or schema that the API is set up for. Then what it'll start doing now is it'll start validating and augmenting the CDR itself. And this is why I said before that the IMRC doesn't hold all the CDR data, because certainly there's some augmentation of that data within the digital gateway itself. So let's talk about validation first. How it validates the information is two main methodologies. One is self-referential validation. So it will be checking the CDR against itself. So it'll be checking various fields against other various fields. So it might say, right, I'm checking what's the class of business here? It's marine. What's the insureds? It's motor cars. That doesn't seem to make sense to me. That would be a validation issue for me, where I think it's a marine risk, but there's some other fields that tell me that it's a motor risk. That would be something where the self-referential checks are failing. And there's quite a number of those validations that would happen where you're checking the CDR against itself. The second thing would be external sources or reference data, where it's checking the information against globally or commonly held reference information, risk codes, ISO codes, other types of reference data, and it'd be checking that the CDR is valid against that external data. So that'd be the second set of sort of checks that it's doing. So assuming that it's moving through those checks, if it's not, we'll talk about the query process in a moment, is the second thing it's doing is it's starting to augment the CDR itself to create a full CDR. And what it's doing there is some of them are calculated fields. So an example of those would be non-fundamental splits. So it'll be creating the non-fundamental splits at that stage. Some of them might be from, again, external data sources. But again, there's a set of fields that are created from a mixture of external data and the CDR itself to get to complete all of those B fields. And obviously the fields that it's getting from the initial submission are the A fields. So the A fields validated plus the B fields created equal the full CDR. And some of those checks, some of those validations, and some of that creation will be completed using a third-party tax calculator. So what happens is, for tax in particular, so all of the validation outside of tax is sort of happening within the gateway, and the functionality is built in within the gateway itself. But some of the checks are going outside to a tax calculator as well, and basically information is flowing to that third-party tax calculator, which is widely used in the market anyway. And then it's returning some values that are used to either augment the information with the B fields, or is part of the validation process. So that's used to complete those two areas. As far as queries are concerned, queries will be fed back to whoever submitted the CDR, and they would have to check what that query is, and then to make the changes to that CDR and resubmit it. And that's why all of these arrows are sort of one way. There should be a query arrow coming back and looping back to show what it is. But what I think what it's trying to say is that, you know, you can't have corrections happening in the gateway, because if you have corrections in the gateway and they've not been made in the placement platform or in the underlying broker or carrier system, you've now got a reconciliation issue where you haven't got an irrefutable core data record because the gateway's got a different version from the submitter. So the thing to bear in mind, if there are queries about these, what will have to happen is if the CDR needs to be corrected, you have to take it back to where it was submitted from and it's resubmitted for validation. And then once it's passed those validations and we're happy that it's, you know, we've got all the A fields and B fields completed, they've been validated and passed all that, including the tax calculation, then it moves into the data store. So you'll have what the LMA called, that's where you get that irrefutable CDR record. So that's your data record that should be used by the entire market, and also the central services. So where we'll see that core data record moving on to, we'll see it moving on to being used in premium and claims. It can also be reported back to yourselves, because obviously you might not, carriers or brokers can also extract the information from the CDR from that central store. So, you know, this is being created not just for the central services. It's got 3 uses. So it's central services, which we'll see in a moment. It's back to brokers and carriers to be able to, you know, consume in your services. We've already had some feedback that might be a bit late for what you've already got in your core underwriting system, but it's available should you want it from that process. And also it's going to be forming part of that regulatory reporting. So some of the information in there is generated, such as, again, non-fundamental splits is a good example of that. They can be then harvested and then pushed out back to Lloyd's specifically for regulatory type reporting. So this is premium submissions. So I warn you in advance, and you've probably seen it from the pack I've sent you. This is quite a busy slide, but I'll try and walk you through it the best I can. It's one of those things about making it easy to comprehend, but also giving you as much detail as we possibly can. So let me explain it this way. So the first block that you've got on the left-hand side there, that's just the various ways and the various types of premium submissions that can be that we can submit. Now, also within the Accord world, so this is our Accord standard. We have this concept, and I'm sure, apologies for people who know this back to front. I can't assume that everyone knows back to front. Is you have this concept of a technical account and a financial account, and the technical account will tell you what the debt is, and the financial account sort of triggers the money movement based on that agreed amount of debt. So that's the difference between the FA and TA. And then there's several types of submissions that you can have. So the first thing is you can have a TA submission or an FA submission. But let's just deal with the TA submissions at the moment, because that's the first one you're going to see. That's the technical account coming into this process. So what happens is there's several ways that account can come in. So the TA submission can come in as an EBOT, which is an electronic back office transaction. So that's an Accord premium submission. It could come in as an API. It could come in via the portal. So you can either upload it, the broker could upload the submission to the portal, or almost, I don't think this will happen, but they could direct key it, or they can upload it, or they can send an LPAN in, and I'll explain. That orange means that that's a transitional service, and I'll come back to that. And then it could do it as an EBOT or an API. And we're hoping that those two channels merge, that the EBOT and the API actually merge, because they're not really trying to develop separate API EBOT standards. The view is that we'll develop API and they will be donated to the Accord standard. So you'll have EBOT XML, you'll have EBOT API, but they'll all be within the standard. So really you've got like a digital end digital submission, which is EBOT or API. You have a portal way of doing that, and you have an LPAN, which is the transitional service. And if I just take the LPAN first, what you can see is that what happens at the bottom of that box is that LPAN is digitalized. So what we're trying to say is the LPAN's not processed differently to the end digital. It's a different submission method. So it's a transitional submission method, and that's converted to a sort of digital message. So then we can continue with the journey for all of them in a very similar manner. So if you imagine the LPAN comes in, it's received, it's digitalized, and then it's almost treated as a digital submission at that point. So it's not got a separate flow, it just rejoins the digital flow, and the transitional service really is the translation of it. It also is received slightly differently as well, because it lands somewhere, IMRC and direct DRI, etc. But it lands there, it's translated, and then it moves on. So where they come into, so where the LPAN and the EBOT and the API and the portal come into, is the ASG gateway. Now, what this does is very similar to the gateway conversation we just had. The first thing it does, especially on the digital submissions, is make sure that the data is in the format that we're expecting. So it's a digital validation, it's not business validation. It's making sure that the EBOT, for instance, is in the format that I'd expect an EBOT to do. Otherwise, it's a reject. Yeah. So really, it's just making sure that the information is correct. It is managing the LPAN digitalization. The portal, you're not going to be able to submit it by the portal unless you put the right information in, because otherwise the submit button will be disabled until you've got the right information in. So EBOT and API are just digitally validated, and assuming that if it's LPAN, it's translated okay, and that the portal's been used or the EBOT's come through, and they've all passed that digital validation, it moves into the IPOS services, or the International Premium Orchestration Service. I'll come back to the FA submission. So we're still on a TA submission, the technical account. Now, what happens now is we've got a TA that we're happy with, and it could have come from any one of those sources. They've all fallen into the same sort of source, whether by a translation or by a common set of data. So we've got a TA that comes into that premium orchestration service, a digital one. So it's a digital piece of information. We're not looking at paper now. The LPAN's been converted if it's an LPAN. And we're validating that against the CDR. So that's why it's a common box on the bottom left-hand corner between that and the gateway. So we're using that CDR that's just been created in the previous process to validate the technical account. And what that is, that's a series of checks. We haven't got the full list of checks, but we know roughly what they are. So it'll be checking against tax, against the premium expected, against whether it's the correct broker, etc., etc. So it's a validation similar, but it's not going to be identical to the validation process we do against submissions today. And if it passes all of those, one thing to be clear about, there's no manual intervention at this stage. You've got a digital submission coming in. Even if it's been translated, it's still a digital submission into the service. We have a digital risk, which is a CDR, and those two are compared digitally. And if it all, if there's no queries based on that, then it's completed that process. If there is queries, if there are queries, so let's say that, out of the X number of checks that have been done automatically against the core data record, Y number have failed, then we go into the query management, which is above the orchestration service there. Now, it's relatively straightforward, because what you're doing is you're just externalizing those queries. The way that happens today is usually by email. There is no clear process for managing a query. The email gets sent out, it'll be tracked on internal to exchanging sort of workflow, and then it'll be managed to the point where the query is responded, or after 5 days the account is rejected as the query is not answered. That happens today. So straight away we've got a better position here, because there's not any sort of email. So there's different ways of handling the queries, but they're all tracked. So, and you can all see them as lead or follow. So you'll be able to know if something's being held up, why it's being held up, where it is, and all of them be reportable. The way you can get these queries is you can have a broker. So these are based on broker queries. You can have a broker who can receive the query by EBOT, by API, or they can get them via the portal. There may be some queries for carriers, and they would be the same options for carriers. So one of the things you might think about is, well, what about EDI? EDIs don't deal with queries, so there's no equivalent EDI for a query. So queries are managed today, as I say, via more emails and telephone conversations. So the options for queries going forward is via Accord EBOT messages, API messages, or via the portal. If it's a portal, you will get an email telling you have a query on the portal, so you know to go and look. So you won't have to keep a live eye on it. But they're the three query methodologies, and they're the same. If they are carrier-based queries, they would go out in the same methodology. It's just that more usually, because the premium submission is made by the broker, most of the queries will go back to the broker anyway. We take the point that the CDR is correct at this point. So if we're using the CDR, if they don't match, the assumption is initially that it's a submission that's incorrect because the CDR is validated and the submission is not. If it turns out that there is a problem with the CDR, then it would go back to the other page and say you need to resubmit the CDR then, and we need to revalidate it. Couple of things to mention. It might be a case that this submission is to do with a risk that predates CDR, or there's no CDR record for it. And then we drop into the box that is at the bottom of the premium orchestration service, which is external digitalization. There will be a service. It may be provided by the joint venture. It might be provided by Limos, but there will be an external, an opportunity to create a IMR, a sort of shortened CDR record. What we're actually calling that is a transitional risk record, because it's not going to have all the detail of CDR, but you will be able to extract the information to allow premium and claims validation from existing MRCs and maybe IMRCs that for whatever reason didn't go through the gateway. So I'll probably have a couple of questions on that, but just remember that we're looking for a CDR first. If the CDR isn't there, we'll look to create a transitional risk record that has enough information to validate premiums and claims. And then that would create the digital record. You would compare the two, and then it would go through query management should it be required. And then those queries would normally go to broker through the gateway or direct through to the portal or to the managing or through to the carrier if required. I'll take a step back into the box onto the left-hand side, and we'll just cover what happens to the FA submission. So if an FA submission comes in, it goes through the FA. Really, FA. There's a way of doing. There's several ways of doing the financial accounting submission, depending on which way you put the TA submission in. So if you've got a CORD, and that's the one we're encouraging, then you have an FA CORD submission, so another EBOT. And that will go through, it will make sure that it's digitally validated. So is it an FA in the format that's expected? And really all you're doing when you get into the orchestration service is you're making sure you're not validating the financial account against the risk record or the CDR, you're validating it against the technical account. You're making sure that that financial account makes sense compared to the technical account, because that's the only check you should really need to do. You've got a technical account that's been agreed. You've answered all the queries on it. It's sitting there waiting for the financial account. The financial account comes in. It checks that it validates against the technical account, and if so, moves on to settlement and money movement, which is there as well. There's other ways of getting a financial account in. There'll be there's a I can't remember the name of it, but there's a broker release for a financial account. There's an EDI message to release a financial account that will be supported on a transitional basis, and you can release the financial account via the portal. So if you put a TA into the portal, then you will be able to release that technical account via FA within the portal itself. But the process is the same. Either way, you're checking that it matches the TA, and then you're releasing it. TA doesn't go, if there's a problem with the FA, it doesn't go into query, it goes into reject, which is the way the Accord process works. If the FA doesn't match, it's not about question, it's about a reject and resubmit. So that's the way it works in the sort of Accord world today. So assuming that the FA is fine, it then moves on to that settlement. And there's several flavors of settlement in the new world. So the flavors of settlement are, it could go via Lloyd's STFO, which for Lloyd's thing, that'll be the main reason to go through that. So that'll be a netted service as it is today via STFO. Company central settlements obviously will continue to be supported as end state. It does bring in a new methodology of settlement, which is direct payment via Vitesse, and that would be outside of the netting and the central service. So there's, for some reason, you needed to move premium quickly, because both Lloyd's STFO and company central settlements is a 3-day process. It might be a return premium that you need to process quickly. It might be a premium you need to process quickly because there's a claim hanging off the back of it. Whatever reason, there's an opportunity to indicate that you'd like that one paid on a direct, moved on a direct basis, and that means the money moves via Vitesse in a matter of hours rather than days. So that we're expecting that to be used more in claims than we are expecting it to be used in premiums, but that direct service is there. The top right-hand box is just showing you what sort of information you can get as these go through. Now, if you're following that, hopefully following me so far on the EBOT methodology, you'll be getting those EBOT messages. Now, from a carrier point of view, you will be not being asked, which the way you are in Rushcon, you'll be not being asked to approve these payments, because the central service is approving on your behalf. That's the sort of way it is today. Each individual payment is not checked with the individual carrier. It's the service is acting on your behalf to make sure that this settlement is in line with the risk and in line with the checks that have been done. And if it does, then it's approved from that point of view. Although obviously we said before, there may be queries associated that need to be resolved, and the queries can be managed via the EBOT process. But there will be broker EDIs, and there also are there's no carrier EDI shown here, because the carrier there's only really one carrier EDI in this process, and that is the USN, and that'll come out just before settlement. So that will continue to be supported. So you still can get the EDI messages, but that's more of an advice than it is managing the process. So really, when you're managing this process, and if you wanted to do it on a transitional basis, it'd be a mixture of EDI and portal if you were receiving queries from that point of view. So that's FA approved, moves on to settlement, and then there's 3 methods of settlement from there. So again, I'll pause. Okay, claims. Now claims, actually there's a lot more going on in claims, but a lot of it is common with what we've spoken about, and the same sort of principles that we've seen in ICOS. So the first thing is, we start here. Rather than a premium submission, we've got a claim submission or a first notification of loss. And again, there's several ways that can be brought into the service. Now, so we'll talk about ECOT. So I think, Ben, the conversation we just had is very relevant, because it's exactly the same here. We've got an ECOT XML type of submission that can go into the gateway. And we have an API submission. Again, the intention is that API submission is an API version of ECOT, and it's donated back to Accord, so we're not creating separate standards. It's just recognizing that we need an API version of those messages. Otherwise, we're sort of on a slightly older technology, which we don't want to be. So it's about providing both. In this case, it's not an LPAN, which is the transitional service, but the LIM-CLIM, and that's an EDI methodology of creating the first notification of loss, which again will be supported for a period of time. And then you have your portal. One thing to realise on the portal, so that's similar to the way it's done today on ECF. So obviously it'll be upgraded, it'll be a new portal, but you've got your opportunity to put that claim in via that portal. Slight difference between claims and premium is premium. It's assumed that over time that portal would be switched off. It's got a transitional flavours for it on premium, because we'd expect everyone to be moving to EBOT, ECOT, or at least API versions of those. On the portal, there's some planned functionality. It has to be approved, but there's some planned functionality to give an ability under broker permission to give the end client an opportunity to record a claim. If you do that, then the portal is really end state, because you're not going to expect a infrequent user who's a policyholder who might only submit one claim to actually adopt a API or Accord functionality. So your portal would persist on the basis that you've got other users of it. So we start off with the first notification of loss. That still goes into the ASG gateway as premium does, and it does the same sort of job. So what we're doing here is we've got the digitally validation, and it doesn't say it here, but it's also converting that LIM-CLIM message. The reason it's not showing a translation service is LPAN is basically not doing anyone a disservice, but it's a glorified Excel spreadsheet with a lot of other information in it. So it needs quite a lot of translation. LIM-CLIM is not really in that same way. It is a message with a structure, rather than a sort of a nested Excel spreadsheet. So it's not a conversion really, it's a mapping exercise from Lincoln to the new area. So it does that mapping conversion, but it's not doing a separate sort of translation exercise. So either way, the gateway makes sure that they digitally validate that they've got all the information, if not reject. If it has got all the information with some mapping from a Lincoln point of view, then it's moving that digital information to ICOS. So you can see on IPOS and ICOS, even though we've got transitional services, it's a single service. We're converting the non-digital into digital, so we can use only one end state of processing these things. And then as you can switch off these transitional services, it's not affecting the underlying process. So, okay, so we've got a first notification loss that's been received, and that's pushed into ICOS. So the first thing it does, and this is something that's not done today, is that it will validate against the core data record. Now, again, to begin with, this validation won't be very rich. Again, I can't tell you exactly what it looks like, and we'll know that more when we start building it out. But there'll be an element where, as this information, as the first notification of loss is received, it will go and look at the data store, it will go and get the relevant core data record, and it will start checking the claims information against that core data record. It's important to realize that this is an orchestration system, not a claims management system. The system will not reject claims. That's for the carrier and the agreement parties to reject. So if it causes if during the validation against the core data record, and there's some validation concerns that are raised, they'll be highlighted to the carriers and the agreement parties as saying, this, it failed this, or this looks a bit odd. It won't make a decision on them. It'll just highlight what areas that it didn't like during that validation process. So it might say that this claim, if it's a loss occurring, that it's outside the policy period, or it might say that the premium hasn't been paid. But it doesn't make a decision on those, it just highlights those. So the first level of validation that it's doing is against the CDR. And that is made very clear to what's happened and what's been successful and what hasn't been, what has been checked. And that will be published. So David, you'll probably say, Ms. Bendel, you'll say, is there a list about that? There will be a list of what validation it's doing, but I couldn't point to it just at this moment in time. So what will happen then is you've got a first notification of loss, and it's gone through a fairly, meaningful but light validation against the core data record, and that's when your negotiation starts from that point of view. So first thing is that the carrier will be notified that they've got that first notification of loss, and I'll go through transitional after I've done so. I'm just doing the digital route through at the moment. So the carrier will have been advised how they want to be told of notifications. So some carriers might say, I want to be notified by Accord messages and API messages. That's fine. So, this first thing will be, you've got a new claim. That will be an API message or an eBot message. You would consume that into your system and you do what you want to do next on it. Worth mentioning that the ICOS system and the IPOS system have been designed to be used completely headerless. So every action you can make in these, you can have an API, at least an API, and where possible, an Accord message. Some circumstances aren't covered by Accord, and some transitions can't really support the Accord message. But wherever Accord can be supported, you'll get an Accord message. If it can't be supported, you'll be getting an API message. But either way, you can consume those into your claims management system if you want. You can action them in your claims management system, and you can send responses from your claims management system. So you can use the ICOS and IPOS systems without actually logging on or going onto the system at all and using it on a completely headerless and a two-way messaging basis. It might be that you say, well, I'm not in a position where I can take APIs or Accord messages yet. I need my notifications via the portal. So from that point of view, it would be on the portal. Again, you'll see broker carrier appearing now rather than just broker. So if you've got a new claim, you'd be notified that you've got a new claim by email, what's called a call to action email. You have a new claim, and then you go onto the portal and you could review the information that's there and any other information. Once you review that information, or your claims teams review that information, they might have queries, and those queries could be multiple and anything. So it could be just the loss reason looks a bit funny. We haven't got an adjuster's report. We have and all of those queries can be managed through the system now. And you can breadcrumb these questions, so you can raise all sorts of queries. You can give them categories, so you can track where your queries are, and you'll see them either through your messages, which you can consume into your own workflow, or there'll be a dashboard type reporting where you can see how many claims you're outstanding, what queries have been answered, what queries haven't been answered. So there's both ways of doing that. I will come back to the sort of heritage transitional services as well. So what you're doing is you've got that a really good auditable two-way flow between the broker and carrier, either on a messaging basis or on a portal basis, about this information that can go backwards and forwards till you reach a point where you're happy with it and you can either approve or deny the claim. Be clear, a big step up from the claims service today is that you can actually run settlements concurrently. They haven't got to be sequential at the moment. Settlements are sequential. You have to finish one before you start two. So you can run multiple settlements at the same time. You can also run settlements at the same time as the claim is being approved. So you can get them to a certain point where you can decide whether you might want to approve some before you finish. You might want to do some prepayments before the claim's actually approved. All of that's supported by the system now. It's up to you whether you make the payments. The click of the button is with the carrier about whether that payment's made. You can do that on an open claim, closed claim. You don't have to reopen the claim. You decide when you make the settlements, and the settlements can be done concurrently. A couple of things to mention about, so almost like the settlements. I've got another slide at the moment which is about the settlement process, but the thing to mention is, I think the concurrency is going to be a big advantage, to be able to run these at the same time. So you can, you don't have to wait till you've done those settlements before you get after your expert fees. For instance, if you want to pay the expert fees while you're still looking at the claim because, you're happy to pay them, you can pay them. You can get on and pay them. You haven't got to wait for that to happen. A couple of things on transitional. So the first thing is, and I don't want to put anyone's back up that Write Back is a transitional. We realise that it's widely used. We realise that it's extremely valuable, and it will be continuing. There are some tweaks because it's not going to be produced in the mainframe, but in its inherent structure will be the same as it is today. The reason it's in transitional is because we've really defined end state as messages that are either ACORD or API. That's the end state digital. And Write Back, while really valuable and really widely used, is neither of those things. So we expect the Write Back messages to either evolve to be that API type messaging, or what's probably better is if the whole ACORD standard evolves so it incorporates all the best elements of Write Back. So you can look at Write Back, but that's a lot further down the line. The point is that it will be supported. It will be as rich as it is today. There are some circumstances that Write Back doesn't carry. So for instance, there's no Write Back version of a first notification of loss. But we'd expect Write Back to evolve as it has. It's evolved up to this point. It will continue to evolve, and hopefully some of the data standard will merge with the ACORD standard that's been adopted. And if it doesn't, then how long it continues outside of that will be certainly a good amount of time, and it'll be with the market for how long they want to see still have use with that. The other ones that are real transitional is, it's not mentioned here, but if we haven't got a data record, we go and get a data record the same way we did for premium and just retrieve the information to be able to validate the claim. But specifically, because we've got a large population of open claims that will predate these systems, we have to have a way of getting the information on that claim into these digital services so you can process those in these digital services. So there's something called Reach Back. And what that will do is, say you've got a claims movement on an existing claim, but the existing claim predates these digital services. It will be triaged, that will know that it predates these services, and there'll be a reach back. So we'll be maintained while all the legacy systems we switched off, the data will remain available. And what the system will do is reach back into that claims information, and they'll get the claims history, and they'll also get the records of whether premium's been paid or not for that particular claim. And then they will instantiate it into this service. So you're not processing it on the legacy. It goes to the legacy data, it brings the legacy data back, and then you continue to manage it on this this data on the digital services, because that avoids you as carriers and carriers and your brokers trying to operate on the new service and a legacy service. What we're saying is if it's a legacy submission, we'll pull the information that's relevant onto this new service and you'll use this new service. You only use one service to do it. As those claims get older, the information might get have less fidelity. That's one way of putting it. In that case, there might be some BPO type activity we need to do to augment that information to make it suitable. And that's something we'll need to go through the build. But the aim is if we've got no claims history there, we'll go get it, and we might have to augment it a bit to go through it. Again, the box on the right-hand side is just some of the messaging options that we've got. So you can still have your EDI messages, your claims workflow triggers and the carrier EDI, so SCMs, etc. They'll be available for a period of time, and that's not defined by the joint venture or by Lloyds. That'll be defined by the market for how long they want to support those transitional services. And then the ones in blue are messaging that you can get, which is, as we've gone through, portal, eBot, eCart, and API. So that's a lot of this portal, a lot of the transitional services are around, messaging and interaction, which you'd expect anyway. So the services is a digital service, and then the transitional services are the translate or translate inputs, outputs, or translate notifications in and out of standards. So that's how it's working from that point of view. So again, I'm going to pause there and just see if anyone's got any questions on the claims front.